Imagine being forced to flee your country because of a civil war. Despite the violence that you left behind and the dangerous encounters during migration, when you get to this new country, you miss your home. The food, clothes, and people are different here, and everything seems foreign. Like most refugees, Somali refugee women have experienced similar struggles adapting to their new Western environments. Acculturation describes the process of psychological and social-cultural changes that occur between contact of two or more cultural groups and their members. Basically, as individuals merge between cultures, their identities, beliefs, and values shift. Healthcare providers and researchers are interested in acculturation because, among various other things, this process has been linked to health outcomes. My project focused on refugee women who come from Somalia, which is located in the Horn of Africa. The Civil War of 1988 in Somalia has led to mass migration of Somalis. This is a conflict that actually precedes the state and continues to present day. And this conflict-driven migration resulted in Somali populations in the Horn of Africa, so in countries like Kenya, Ethiopia, as well as Western Europe and North America. Today, there is more than 1 million Somalis living outside the country. The chart here on the left maps out the distribution of Somali migrants from 2015. My study is looking at acculturation and how it impacts mental health outcomes for Somali women living in Western countries. To help guide me, I had two research questions during this exploratory study. The first one being, how does acculturation affect the psychopathology of Somali refugee women living in Western societies? Two, what are the cultural differences in the perceptions of mental health between Western and Somali societies, and does this perception shift following migration to a new country? In order to answer these questions, I examined all the relevant literature to see what some of the common themes were. So the literature I included was from 27 articles, which were published between the years of 2000 to 2019. I included data from 7 different countries, and for my population of concern, I was focusing on Somali refugee women and not adolescents, so I didn't include articles that were focused on those who were less than 18 years old. For the research that pertained to mental health, I searched everything from psychological distress to schizophrenia as keywords in these online databases in order to see what I could find. And next I'm going to go through some of the themes that I found from this literature. The first thing that I noticed really was a religious explanation for mental disorders. In Somalia, almost 99% of the population is Muslim. Islam plays a key role for Somali refugees as well. It's used not only as a coping buffer, but also as an explanation for why mental disorders like depression exist. My literature suggested that Somali refugees see mental illness with a spiritual explanation, not a biological one. Reference to jinns and Tsar spirits were heavily cited as what possesses a person to be mad or crazy. And because religion was used as an explanation, Somali refugees were cited as using religious leaders and reading the Quran as key to address mental health. Even those who were well integrated into their Western society, so those who were more acculturated, mentioned the importance of the Quran. Additionally, the reliance of religion and prayer was used for occultative stress, so the stress that comes from the merging of these two cultures, and this was seen irrespective of age, time since leaving Somalia, and traumatic experience. Strong familial bonds was also noticed, and for this community, strong familial bonds act to both alleviate and perpetuate psychological distress. Shame and stigma against mental illness within Somali communities prevented individuals from addressing some of their somatic and mental symptoms. But this shame was not prevented from generally seeking help, but rather from seeking help from outside sources, such as Western practitioners. Somali refugees repeatedly cited the importance, actually, of seeking help from family for alleviating psychological distress. The importance of family is also highlighted in findings that implied that psychological distress results from loss of family or isolation from community. For example, migration status, which is often used as a proxy measure for acculturation, was not predictive of postpartum depression symptoms, but those who had experienced intimate partner violence or were worried about family members back in Somalia were more likely to develop depressive symptoms. As I alluded to earlier, Somali women prefer to seek help from family members, traditional healing, or ignore their symptoms altogether instead of seeking help from professional medical facilities. This avoidance of professional mental health services is a direct consequence of the mistrust that exists for Western medicine. The belief that doctors are the ones who make you sick, that all they do is prescribe pills, and that there really is a lack of appropriate support and interpreters was a major finding throughout. Combined with the lack of trust, language barriers and low levels of health literacy resulted in this notion that formal healthcare is really a last resort. The last theme that I think is worth mentioning is post-migration stressors, and this involves everything from economic troubles to employment issues, discrimination, when we're talking about the US, especially in a post 9/11 society, as well as the loss of status. And the loss of status can include everything like employment, but also the tension that exists between the younger and more acculturated generation versus the older generation, which is more of what I focused on. A lot of these post-migration stressors and acculturative stressors came from language abilities, specifically refugees' lack of ability to speak their host country's language. Higher levels of acculturation from increased language acquisition led to greater chance for employment and therefore decreased risk for developing mental disorders. Firstly, poor language skills were linked to decreased ability to connect and form new relationships, which led to higher levels of acculturative stress. And so to kind of sum up what I just talked about in the last few minutes, I think the first takeaway to notice is that high levels of acculturation does not necessarily correlate to better mental health outcomes or increased health-seeking behavior. Acculturation is one of the many factors influencing mental health outcomes for Somali refugee women. And while the simplest explanation may allude that higher levels of acculturation leads to better mental health outcomes, the relationship is really more complex than this. The role of faith and spirituality, avoidance of Western medicine, community input and influence, and post-migration stressors shape and are altered by acculturation, which therefore result in different mental health outcomes. And because of the complexity of all this, I think it's really important that culturally and linguistically sensitive refugee mental health services are provided in order to connect the viewpoints of clinicians and Somali patients. Miscommunication and misunderstandings are common when Somali refugees visit Western practitioners, resulting in impaired health care interactions, lower levels of patient satisfaction, and decreased willingness to return back to these places. Religion, however, plays a major role in this community's lives, and I think it's really important not to dismiss this and instead to incorporate it in therapeutic treatment. Religious leaders can also influence individuals' perceptions of mental illness and health-seeking behavior, so I believe that working with imams or other religious and community leaders is foundational to addressing mental health concerns for this community. Cultural brokers and interpreters are great resources as well, but specifically for this community, I think there's more that can be done. While these approaches help alleviate some of the challenges that Somali women have with Western healthcare, they do not address the other cultural barriers that may persist. In this tight-knit community, individuals may have confidentiality concerns when speaking with cultural brokers or interpreters, which can hinder them from confessing personal details and addressing their concerns. And so a possible long-term encompassing solution that I propose is for states or governments that accept these refugee communities to provide free language immersion classes for adult refugees. Younger generations, so these people's kids are learning English or Finnish and other European languages in their schools, but their parents are not getting that kind of opportunity. English as a second language class or ESL classes have been shown to improve health literacy. And so, in addition to empowering refugees and increasing job opportunities, language acquisition may also help Somali women feel more comfortable to disclose to health practitioners. So, those were some of the findings that I had. I would be happy to answer any more questions in the next few minutes. Thank you.